Hello everyone, Happy New Year. I figured I would get another video out right before the year's end. This is going to be on another game that's come out relatively recently, Game of the Year contender for a lot of people, and that would be The Outer Worlds. This is a game that a lot of people were very excited for, and to understand why, you have to basically understand what Obsidian is to a lot of people. I think that they're one of the more interesting companies making RPGs out there, Western RPGs specifically, but they've always kind of been seen as this underdog company because they've often made a lot of sequels for other people's properties. Their games have often had very harsh deadlines, and they sometimes come out rough around the edges. But through all of that stuff, they have some truly great writing and role-playing experiences in their catalog. Fallout New Vegas is, in my opinion, not only the best Fallout game, but it might actually be the best Western RPG that I've ever played. It's certainly in my top 10 games of all time. And a lot of people, when they saw The Outer Worlds, basically thought that it was going to be New Vegas 2. That said, it's been a long time since New Vegas came out, and I never really was under the assumption that the key people who made that game what it was were even still at the company. So I was definitely a bit more cautious about this, since it's obviously not New Vegas 2. It's its own new thing. Different publisher, different people, but the same company and the same ideals that hopefully would make their past projects great. And while I do like the game, I can't help but feel a little disappointed. But, we're not going to start off on the negatives right now. We'll go straight to the positives. First one, the combat in this game, I think, is much better than Fallout 4's combat. And that's really interesting to me because The Outer Worlds is basically a Fallout clone. Like, that's really the politest way of describing it. It plays almost exactly like Fallout 3. The few improvements that were made to the combat in Fallout 4 were integrated here, and I actually think are done better. The ability to dodge gives you some extra momentum and flexibility that you don't normally have in these games. And the time dilation, while it is obviously very similar to VATS, takes a lot more skill to use. Most of the time in VATS, you're just aiming for the head, you don't have to think strategically. Here, there are more pronounced effects by hitting different parts of the body, and you actually have to aim. So it just makes combat more interesting, more exciting. It definitely makes up for some of the other shortcomings related to combat, like the fact that there are not really that many weapons. They are different in terms of the effects that they can have. You want to carry weapons that are better against robots, but there's not a huge amount of variety to the actual guns in the game. And also, I did think that in general, the game was just a hair too easy, even on the hardest difficulty. The footage you're seeing now is from the easiest difficulty. This is just me dinking around in the game. It's not really like my most serious gameplay. But yeah, even on the hardest difficulty, I never really felt super challenged by most of the fights, save a few exceptions where you'll fight like a really big monster or a robot. Those are really the only times that it became a serious challenge. I also like how the companions work in this game. I like that they have some kind of unique ability. They don't really feel all that distinct from one another, at least as far as the abilities go, but it's a nice idea. Obviously, I really love that they've pretty much preserved the dialogue system that we had in New Vegas. I love seeing that kind of stuff here, all of the different skills that can come into play, as well as your attributes. It's very interesting how they did it, and it really encourages you to not just think about your current playthrough, but to think about your other playthroughs, because when you can see those options of what you could have done, it just gets my brain kind of flowing in that way. I've beaten this game 3 times now, so I obviously enjoy it quite a bit. But I certainly think that it does have some weaknesses, which we will get into. Most of those weaknesses, I think, come from the fact that the setting of this game isn't that interesting. I think it's pretty clear that they wanted to pitch it as Fallout in space in a lot of ways. They tried to have the retro-futuristic optimism that you see in Fallout. It's very similar to the 50s aesthetic of that game. But I don't know, I'm just not really huge on everything looking bright and inviting a lot of the time when it is supposed to be a somewhat dystopian setting. I just didn't think that the environments really looked as harsh as they needed to. The conditions didn't look that bad. most of that is something you sort of have to just learn from people telling you how things are in the world, but you don't get a great sense of it just from seeing it. I think this also applies to the nature of the planets. It doesn't really feel like you're visiting several different planets. They all kind of feel like slightly different versions of the same planet. You're walking around and the wilderness across the 3 planets doesn't really look that different. You're walking along the same roads. You're fighting the same generic marauders who are just guys who want to kill you, who have no backstory, and there's nothing interesting to them. There are just these aspects that don't feel very fleshed out, and I know that those aspects would have been fleshed out in another Obsidian game. Even the characters in this game, they're not very interesting. I'm struggling to recall a lot of them right now. Too many of them, they just kind of felt like the same person. Everyone spoke with a very similar tone of voice. There wasn't a huge amount of variety. And everyone had this weird, almost sarcastic way of speaking, even though they were sometimes addressing very serious situations, and it just made it hard to empathize with them. There's also lots of reused assets all over the place. You'll walk into the same houses, interior layouts, that sort of thing. It's kind of ridiculous. Even happens in the very end of the game. There are some very clear examples of assets being reused, which really kind of diminish the nature of the finale. Characters being uninteresting, that unfortunately does sort of apply to the party members. There is not a huge amount to them. They all kind of feel like some of the lesser party members in New Vegas, because that was a game that had a lot of party members, but clearly much more work went into writing some of them than others. I think that the only one who really stood out for me was Vicar Max. He was definitely my favorite. I liked how you could sort of change his perspective on things. I thought Felix was okay, but he did seem a little bland. I did like the idea of his quest, though. And there are others that just don't interest me at all. Parvati is useful to have around, and she's a good initial companion, but she has really boring quests that basically play themselves. I really wish that you could make decisions during those quests. I just didn't really get the point of it. Sam the robot, I was really hoping he would have some kind of quest or there would be more to him, but there wasn't. He's just kind of like a lame version of HK-47. I don't know, it's not even really worth getting into every single party member here. They don't strike me as all that interesting. I'm certainly going to continue to bring them along because you do get very nice bonuses for having them in your party and stuff like that. But they just aren't that memorable compared to characters like Boone or Veronica or characters from Knights of the Old Republic 2 or something like that. There's just nothing here compared to other stuff that I've seen Obsidian do. And I find that a little strange. The companions feel half-baked even though you get them all very early on and very easily. They clearly wanted you to have a team, and I don't get that sense very well from this. Still, even if there's not a huge amount going on with those, you can roleplay your heart out in this game. You've got lots of options about how you want to play the character. We even have some of those low intelligence options. It was kind of fun to see those brought back, and they definitely were quite thoughtful about where they put some of them. It's nice to see a game like this because it feels like a style that is mostly abandoned, and that's why I think people were so excited for The Outer Worlds, is that you don't see these kinds of RPGs being made at the scale that they used to be made at. The problem with that is that this game feels like it could have come out at virtually any point in this decade. This could have come out in 2013 or something like that, and I wouldn't bat an eye. You could even tell me that it's an Unreal Engine 3 game, and then it came out on the 360, it was the last Xbox 360 game or something. And I just might believe you, because it does have this weirdly dated quality to it. It's kind of like playing The Bureau almost, where I like what they were going for, but I can't deny that it's all trends that pretty much have gone out the door. But they are trends that I like, and anybody who likes these kinds of RPGs and you just can't find anything else like it, you're gonna want to play this. I know people who haven't played games for most of this decade, but they played games like New Vegas and they love them, and I know that they would love this because it's another shot of that sort of gameplay. So this game is, I would describe, a niche game. It's really not going to be as big as I think that a lot of the marketing and the media have made it out to be. Because I do like this game. I just don't think that it has enough going for it. The story isn't really that complicated. They try to do faction things, but it can't hold a candle to the stuff that was done in New Vegas. They try to set up some kind of ideological struggle, but it all feels kind of half-baked. Like, they didn't really want you to have to make hard moral choices. I think this story could have been structured very differently. Talking to Phineas Wells, it's just nothing like talking to someone like Mr. House. I don't feel the same way. I don't feel like I'm getting into the head of a character who has a vision, who can shape the world right now, and I need to decide who I'm going to support to make that happen. I don't feel that stuff at all from this. And I think that's probably because they either didn't have the same passion, they didn't have the same people, or they didn't have the same resources to do that. I like that you can play this game in many different ways. I like that you can just shoot people in the face and the game doesn't break. And I normally would complain about the game being somewhat short, but I think that helps encourage the replayability of it. It's much easier to replay something like this than it is something like New Vegas. But there's definitely a part of me that really hoped that there was going to be more to this game. That it would be a true successor to the kinds of games that Obsidian has built their reputation on. And this is just kind of like a watered-down version of that. Maybe things were watered down so that it would be seen as more mainstream, but I really don't know. Still, I will say it's really not been as buggy as some of Obsidian's other games, so that's definitely a positive. Really, my only technical issue that I have at this point is that the option to make the font bigger doesn't make it big enough for my liking. That's really it. I can't think of any other serious technical problems that came up during my playthrough. I'm very glad that I purchased this game on Black Friday for $35. That's really all I'll say. And I will recommend it to anyone who likes these kinds of RPGs, the stuff from this era. But if you've never played it before, I'm not really sure that this is a great place to start. It's possible that the game could improve as it goes along. Maybe Obsidian will make some DLC for it that's somewhere near as good as the DLC that New Vegas got. But I'm just not sure, and for now I think I'm just going to be sitting around hoping that the Outer Worlds 2 can iron out these problems. But I don't even know if we're going to get an Outer Worlds 2, because Obsidian has been purchased by Microsoft, and they probably have a new direction for the company. But still, let me know what you thought of this game. Did you love the Outer Worlds? Maybe you really didn't like it. I don't know, just let me know. It could be your game of the year, and that's totally fine. I understand why this would be someone's favorite game of the year. But for me, it is a pretty good game, but it's not a great game. So that's all I really have to say for now. Please have a happy new year, and I will see you in 2020.